Thank you for that introduction. We've spent a lot of time over the years in various retail events. So as was correctly pointed out, I do come from the buy side. So what I would like to offer you today is something that is executable. We've had some excellent speakers earlier this morning, a lot of trends and visions, but we want to show how this can be made real in your environments. So let me begin with the presentation, please. So although that was titled, Did You Know? It's by no means my intention to challenge your intellect at all. I think the only thing we're trying to prove with something like this is that change is constant. Retail, unfortunately, as an industry, always seems to be somewhat of a laggard in technology adoption. But you can see the impact of technology. It's not only enabling enterprises, it's forcing changes on them. Changes in speed to market, changes in data analytics, and in real-time demand, in the appropriate hands of users. So today I want to influence your thoughts a little bit about changing a traditional retail view and see how these things can impact your business as they stand. So what we have here is a typical retail P&L. I think the entire retail industry lives on this mantra of measuring everything as a percentage of sales. Very common. So these are obviously the income lines, typically about 20 in a retail chart of accounts. And these are all the expense accounts. And in good accounting tradition, the expenses are always more than the income line. So there's usually about 45 of these in retailers. So all retailers I know, and having been one myself for a long time, we all just analyze what percentage of revenue How did it happen? Which store did it happen in? I think what I want to carry across to you today is that all the P&L it's a photograph of an operations execution. So behind every statistic, every number here is a point where a person, a process, and inventory met. So we need to peel back the layer at least one level deeper to truly influence your business. So we show you how this can be done. The question, of course, is where do we begin? So again, you've got a lot of vision this morning, a lot of trends which are completely applicable, but how do you take that back to your offices and improve your business with it? So, the point of beginning is completely individual. It's individual to the maturity of your retail enterprise. Everybody is at a different stage of evolution. So if we look at a typical retail organization chart, this is how it appears with the internal departments. You have the board, finance, HR, IT, logistics, and so on. I think what you need to determine here is what is your immediate priority, because technology can help everything behind every internal department. Well, once you know where to start, we urge you to go down another level and get more granular. So for instance, if the issue is typically operations, then you look at store operations, and this can be distilled all the way down to store communications and store support. So the idea here is go back, look at where the largest pain points are. Quite typically, they will be across internal departments, but you need to identify them first, where they are for your enterprise. I like to start with this equation, and the Boston Consulting Group MD made reference to this earlier as well. So we all know profit is a challenge. Seeing that this is a generic presentation, the best place to start is the common ground for every retailer, and that's the inventory. So we all know we're challenged for profit. I think if you look at the sources of gross profit, you have the vendor who gives you the product, and you have the customer who monetizes it, converts it back to cash, hopefully more than what you paid for it. So I propose to you that in a supply-driven economics world, your margin is actually not in your own hands. It's regulated by the market. The intense competition in every retail format will keep your margins honest. And the cost of trying to profit more than what the market will let you is to lose the sale. Then if we come across and look at the largest expenses in retail, I think this has been a common theme all morning as well, the occupancy costs, the rentals. To use the local market as an example, and probably every other global one as well, there's a constant fight for good real estate. Whether you're in Singapore, Malaysia, North America, Latin America, it doesn't matter. And the landlords know what impact this has. So once again, I think your occupancy cost, although we can find you ways of improving it, but largely they're regulated by the market. We look, at the staff expenses next. Again, this was mentioned this morning. So none of us actually synced on our presentations, which I think should be a lot of confidence for you that all these themes are common across all the presentations you've seen so far. In terms of staff, you have two problems. You have staff you can't keep. Attrition is a huge issue in retail. 4-5% a month typically is the statistic, which means at the end of the year you have a 50% turnaround in most of your staff. Again, there's ways to improve it, but the law of supply and demand holds true in the labor market as much as it does in any other product market. So this too is regulated by the market. If you look at the marketing expense, I think for all of you who spend money on advertising, it's very evident that the rates never go down. Your quantum may increase and they may give you some more space in it, but you will always spend more dollars at the end of the year. That too, regulated by the market. So your three big expenses you can influence marginally, but largely influenced by the market. Now, one thing you can hit all the time is the inventory. This is always in your hands. Regardless of any other pressure, what you buy, how quickly you sell it is always in your hands. So a good place to start with technology adoption is always to manage your inventory. So what is productivity in retail and what do we look for? Again, you're getting a lot of statistics, but how do you distill that to something that you can action after 4 o'clock today? So in our estimation, the first thing you must look for is to automate anything that's a recurring manual process. And especially if it includes any double handling of data. This is just manual processes that will cost you in labor expense that need not exist at all. So that's one of the most obvious places to begin your search in retail productivity. Then secondly, of course, very important, is that you've got to identify your bottlenecks. Now, these will be apparent in three forms usually. The products themselves, bottlenecks of information that typically affect your product decisions, and bottlenecks in processes. So you also need an analysis. Now, whether it's the advertising department or the property department or the purchasing department, in some shape or form, these three things are present. Then, of course, you also need to make sure that everything you do is scalable. Yeah. I don't know any retail company who's happy with one store. You're all in the business of multiple stores. So whatever you do in one location has to be done across all locations. And all of this is not possible without empowering all the right people with the right data. So you see 4 different icons here. We have a manager, we have a warehouse manager, a shop floor assistant, and a consumer. So you need all of this to come together in order to give you more commercially valuable information. But the absolute goal here, first and foremost, is to increase anything that will help your product flow. Everything else is secondary. If we bring it all back to inventory, this is the place to start. And then what we definitely want to do is impact this statistic. Again, there was a lot of reference made to this earlier this morning. Retailing largely, in most economies, the honeymoon is over. You cannot open an infinite number of stores infinitely. Even the markets such as India and China, who were the growth markets of the region, have learned this year. So what matters now is getting every location to perform. What is the impact? So that is what productivity is, but productivity without business value is not productivity at all. So first thing you want to look for is value addition per head. I think sales per employee is a little bit of a simplistic measurement. That's why it's okay as a vision, but a detailed execution needs to go beyond that. Once again, in order to identify this, you need to map a process and see how you can reduce the cycle time and increase the throughput. That's the name of the game. Then, of course, you want to impact your financial assets. So this clearly indicates that we want to increase your stock turn. So if you are currently a grocery format retailer doing 18 turns a year, we'd like to bring that up to 22. You would surely consider that productivity. We want you to sell more with less stock on hand. Then, of course, we also want to impact the non-financial assets. So this is typically your people or your processes. Again, increase throughput, reduce cycle time, and once again, the right information in the right hands to enable all of this. So on a high-level discussion, this is what productivity should be and how it is measurable to you. So effectively, behind everything is a business process. The P&L, like I said, I think is a snapshot, is a photograph of a number of events that occurred before it. So the game here is the workflow. So here's a typical process of receiving into a distribution center and putting that stock away. Now, we need not go through all of this. This is just to cite an example that you can flow chart everything you do in every segment of your business, and technology can enable that productivity. Now, here's a live example of a very large retailer in China that we were speaking to. This is where we re-engineered their process. So to the left is the as-is, and to the right is what we recommended. Once again, this is in your handout, so you can read it at your leisure. But the point being, it may look more complicated, but the result of this was an increased throughput and a reduced cycle time. So if you can do that in all of your distribution centers, in all of your retail stores, in all of your internal departments, you'll discover how much money is left on the table internally. It's no use complaining about the landlord. The minute you're walking out of that meeting, there's 6 people behind you vying for the same site. You've got to effect what you can immediately. Now, whether you want to stay in retail or not is an entirely different discussion. This presentation is on the assumption that you're in retail to stay. Its viability as a business, as an industry is beyond the scope of this discussion. So now I start with inventory typically, like I said, because it's common to all of you, but it need not stop there. So when we're talking retail, generally there are 4 environments in retail. So any operation, any process within your store will fall within one of these 4. We have the buying experience, we have the shopping experience, inventory and supply chain management, and productivity and infrastructure. So usually at this point I'm asked about the difference between the two. So the buying experience is very transactionary. Usually everything to do with your POS. It's where there's an exchange of money for goods or payment for goods. The shopping experience typically a lot softer. Customer loyalty, in-store merchandising, inventory, supply chain, self-explanatory. Productivity is always driven towards personal productivity. So this is where you start marrying the labor cost to productivity. How do you influence that? How do you influence advertising by making it more productive? How do you increase your stock turn? Now within these 4 environments, we have further subcategories. And within every one of these subcategories is typically an automated workflow that will enhance productivity for you. This comes from global best practices. Where it's not confidential, we can share with you what the leading retailers in the world do. So some things to be mindful of. I think I also wanted to flag a couple of opportunities I think you should be aware of in Singapore over the next 6 to 12 months. Definitely you have to start looking at your point of sale. I think the trend there is mobility through and through. The longer your salesperson can stay next to your customer, the more they will spend. You will increase your loyalty, you will increase your retention. Absolutely another thing again that has come up a lot this morning is creating an interactive store and omni-channel. So what we're showing you here is how the trends can be executed. And definitely you can also impact your labor productivity with workforce management. Once again, if we peel this back to a layer, it'll come down to a flow chart. And again, we increase throughput, reduce cycle time. All of this will show as a reduction in the famous retail measurement of percentage to sales. It'll increase your sales and reduce your expenses concurrently, which is the best of both worlds in business, of course. So you have the potential to impact every single KPI in every one of your environments. All you need to identify is where to begin and which one moves the needle most. The 80-20 rule. Obviously, we go for the lowest hanging fruit, the 20% of the problems that could give you an 80% improvement. So the lesson very simply is that everything now is about speed to market. So we've all heard about Zara. As we also heard this morning, they deliberately build in redundancy into their capacity. This is so they can react to a trend in the market. A typical fashion retailer goes into a season with 95% inventory. Zara goes in with 1/3, 33%. But they sell more than anybody else. From production to in-store is a 21-day turnaround. We got retailers who can't get it from the factory to their own DC in 21 days. So I'm urging you to change and shift your thinking because the same old strategies will give you the same old results. Real estate cost is only going to go up. So is advertising, and good staff are only going to get harder to find. So everything you're looking for, the answer lies within. You don't need to look outside as much as you think you do. Now this applies to either inventory or a process itself. But the idea being you want your orange line as much in alignment with the blue line as possible. It'll never be perfect. Too much to the right is too little too late. Too much to the left is too much too soon. So you just got to reduce the gap. Yeah, getting it right is impossible. It doesn't exist. So once again, your traditional focus areas, again, we measure everything by percentage to sales. Now, this is a format of a consumer electronics retailer. So I understand by different formats that your percentage of revenues vary, but we pick the guys who've got the toughest job in the business. If they can make a profit in retail, everybody else can. So this is to cite the most aggressive example. You know, they will spend days and hours and hundreds of management meetings trying to affect their shrinkage and reduce it, which is typically 1.5% of their revenues. Spend even more time on getting their warehousing and logistics strategies right, which is 2.5% of revenues. And then, of course, they sweat buckets over advertising campaigns, which no one can still, to this day, measure a return on. So there's a statistic known as ROA, return on advertising. I know I struggled with it for 12 years and couldn't figure it out, so I don't think anybody else has. All they look for is a gross increase. But they're spending all the time looking at this. Now, are we optimizing the inventory, the staff, and the occupancy cost expense, which is in excess of 12% of revenues? You know, are we missing the point? Now, whether it's 12% of your revenues or 50 in the case of a fashion retailer, the point is all of this will always account for about 50% of your OPEX. Yet we spend all our time looking at the things historically that we're accustomed to. You know. So the question, of course, is how does it all come together? The obvious answer is that we do have a booth outside, so you can see these things in action. So please take the time to stop by and see how this could be adopted in your environment. But in terms of the vision of retail in the future, how it can be seamless between technology and business enablement, I'd like to show you another video here. So with that, I thank you. We do also have a workshop tomorrow afternoon. I think it's by invitation, but we can certainly speak to John about this if you're interested in attending, where we could go into the details of your format specifically. This was somewhat generic in nature. So I hope it added some value to your afternoon today. Thank you.